I've lived in this house by the sea for nearly 50 years. My name is Carol Ann Delaney. I'm 72, a retired art teacher, and for most of my life I carved things out of wood and silence. This house, with its wide porch and smell of pine and salt, has held every version of me: wife, mother, grandmother, widow. That morning was bright, the kind of mainspring light that makes the ocean look sharper than usual. The tide was low. Seagulls hovered like paper scraps in the wind. Inside, Haley was twirling in her ivory wedding gown, surrounded by mirrors and flattery. Her mother, Eleanor, fussed with the hem. David stood nearby, phone in hand, barely looking up. I waited until they all settled. Then I brought out the box I'd wrapped myself. It was simple. Brown paper, soft ribbon, tied with a knot I used to use when I packed my husband's lunches. I handed it to Haley with both hands, like passing a secret. I told her it was something special, something from my hands and my heart. Her fingers worked the paper quickly, barely glancing at the details. When the lid came off and she saw the wooden doll inside, her face pinched. Her mouth twisted just slightly, but enough. She turned to Eleanor and laughed loud and clear. "Cheap." That's what she said. "This looks so cheap." I watched Eleanor stifle a smile. David didn't say a word. The air in the room turned sharp. I stood still. I felt my cheeks burn, not with shame, but with a strange kind of heat that had nothing to do with age or embarrassment. I walked forward slowly and took the doll from her hands. She didn't resist, just looked confused, like I had broken some invisible rule. I held the doll in one palm and looked straight at her. I spoke without raising my voice. "If that is how you see this gift, I will find someone more worthy to receive it." I paused, not for effect, but to make sure I was steady. "And as for your wedding, I'm sorry, but this house will not be the venue." The silence that followed was thick and brittle. Haley's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came. Eleanor blinked as if she had just tasted something bitter. David finally looked up from his phone. He said my name once, like he couldn't believe I meant it. I didn't explain myself further. I turned and left the room. Out on the porch, the wind had picked up. The sea was folding itself in waves, calm but endless. I sat down and let the wooden doll rest on my lap. No one followed me. Not at first. Inside, I heard whispers and hurried feet. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of gulls instead. That doll had taken me weeks. Not because it was hard to make, but because every carve, every curve held a memory. The grain ran like the veins in my own hands. Inside, hidden beneath a latch in the base, was something Haley never saw. But it didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had chosen not to disappear. People like me, older and quieter, we get used to fading into the edges of family gatherings. We're thanked politely, smiled at, patted. But today I stepped into the center, not with shouting, not with tears, with a sentence, a decision. The breeze pushed my hair back. I remembered my mother's voice telling me once that there's no shame in being kind, but there is power in being clear. That morning, I was both. By 11:30 a.m., I had called the listing agent. The house wouldn't sell overnight, but it wouldn't be theirs either. Not for a wedding, not for show. This home had held my life. It would not become a backdrop for someone else's pretense. And as I watched a petal from Haley's bouquet drift across the porch floor, I realized something. Sometimes it isn't what people take from you that hurts the most. It's what they assume you'll give them without asking. That day I stopped that story mid-sentence, and I wrote my own. After the dress incident, I thought they would pause. Maybe they'd reach out. But days passed and no one came to speak. Then I saw it. A wedding announcement on Haley's social media page. My name tagged the house named as the venue. Not just wishful thinking. It was stated as fact. I stared at the post in silence, heart steady but breath short. They had gone ahead with the plan. without me, without even asking again. There were florists mentioned, a menu tasting scheduled for Sunday at 2:30 p.m., a guest list well over 100. The photos showed my porch draped in digital renderings of floral arches and lanterns. I read every word, each one like a quiet insult, but I didn't react. Not yet. I opened my calendar. I wrote 3 words in ink. Call real estate. Then I called. That same afternoon, I spoke with a woman named Shelley at a local agency. She remembered my house from when she was a girl. She'd always admired the hydrangeas by the fence. Her voice was soft and curious, asking why now. I told her I was ready for something smaller, easier to keep. I didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. We set up a private listing. No signs, no online public records, just word of mouth through trusted buyers. I wanted the sale to happen quietly. I didn't want drama. I wanted certainty. Power doesn't always need noise. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. Then I called someone I trusted, a woman named Marie who ran events in town. She was sharp, discreet, and loyal. I asked her to keep her eyes open, to document anything official that showed my property being used or claimed without my permission. She didn't ask why. She just said she'd handle it. 2 days later, she sent photos of a rented tent being dropped off on my lawn. I forwarded the pictures to my lawyer, along with screenshots of Haley's posts. We prepared a formal notice not to serve yet, but to keep ready. I wasn't planning to destroy the wedding, but I was making sure I could if I had to. Meanwhile, Haley kept posting. Flower arrangements. A post about choosing wine with Eleanor. She called the house magical. I laughed not out of spite, but from the strange poetry of it. She was building a fantasy on borrowed ground, and she didn't even know it was slipping away. I cleaned the attic that week, found photo albums, old letters, and the wedding veil my mother had worn. I set those things aside, not out of sadness, out of preparation. I wasn't walking away from this house. I was stepping forward into something freer. Every evening I watched the tide roll in. I kept my phone close. I waited for a text, a knock, a conversation. Nothing came. They were so sure I would stay silent, that I would cave, that I would let love or guilt make me small. They had forgotten who built this home with her own hands, who stayed after my husband passed, who patched the roof in the middle of a storm, who made every holiday matter even when money was tight. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about worth. Mine. The value of being seen, not just used. And if it cost them a little chaos, maybe it would buy them some clarity too. I thought of the doll again. Tucked away safely now, far from Haley's dismissal. She had never opened it. Never knew what it carried. Just like she didn't see what this house carried. The weight of decades. The laughter in the walls. The quiet in the floorboards. You don't just take something like that for granted and expect it to stand still. I wasn't angry. Not in the way they probably imagined. I was certain. There's a difference. The day the buyer came to tour, I baked lemon muffins. Just enough to make the place feel like home, not staged. The woman had tears in her eyes when she stepped onto the back porch. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's house in Cape Cod. I nodded, told her the sea was the same, but the stories were better here. As she walked the rooms, I stayed quiet. I listened to the sound of footsteps that might belong here next. Not my family, not my pain. Just someone ready to love the place with respect. When the offer came, I signed the papers the next day. I didn't even blink. Sometimes the best revenge is giving yourself what no one else thought you deserved. Not applause, not pity, just peace on your terms. The first time Liam showed up after the rehearsal, it was just before 3:15 p.m. He didn't come with flowers or excuses, just a backpack and a quiet look I hadn't seen on anyone else's face. Not pity, not judgment, just concern, plain and honest. He asked if I had a minute to talk. We sat in the sunroom where the light hit the floor just right. He looked around, then lowered his voice. He told me things I didn't expect to hear. That Haley had laughed about the doll again later that evening. That Eleanor had joked it looked like something from a thrift store. And then he told me about David. Liam had seen messages between David and Eleanor. Talk about power of attorney medical paperwork references to my memory and how I was starting to confuse dates. Liam said he had seen a copy of a drafted document unsigned but prepared. It listed David as having shared authority over my financial accounts just in case, but I hadn't seen it. No one had talked to me. They had planned it like I was a problem to manage. My hands went cold. I listened without interrupting. Liam pulled out his phone, showed me photos he had taken. I recognized my name in bold. I recognized the lawyer's header. The dates were recent, just after my last birthday, just before the dress rehearsal. He paused, waiting for my reaction. I held still. I stayed quiet. My eyes found the yard beyond the window where the lavender swayed in a breeze I couldn't hear. That's where I kept my focus. It helped me breathe through the heaviness. This wasn't just Haley's insult. This was my own son choosing control over conversation. Fear over trust. I turned to Liam. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He looked down, said he had waited too long already, that he didn't agree with how they were treating me, but he didn't know how to help. Until now. We spent the next 2 hours going through my documents. Bank statements, property titles, medical records. I pulled out the originals and Liam compared them to the drafts on his phone. Nothing had been filed yet, but the intent was clear. David had been building a case around my memory lapses. He was preparing to make decisions for me, without me. I felt the ache move through me slowly, not sharp, just deep, like something old, finally breaking. Not because it was struck, but because it had been quietly cracked too many times. I had raised David with stories, meals, patience, and now he was preparing to manage me like an estate. Liam stayed late. He helped me scan and lock down key documents. We moved important items to a secure folder. I added a passcode to my email. We called Shelley together and confirmed every step of the sale was still under my name and control. I told her to add Liam's name as a trusted contact for updates only. No authority, just backup. That night, I made us grilled cheese sandwiches. We didn't talk much during dinner. But when Liam reached for the last slice, I smiled, told him it was his and meant it. It was the first full breath I'd taken all day. Before he left, Liam asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't sure, but I was better than I was yesterday. And I was grateful. He stood at the door a long time. Then he hugged me. Not quickly, not politely, but like someone who knew something had shifted. After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed. I held the wooden doll again, the one Haley had tossed aside. I thought about what was hidden inside it, the diamond, the legacy, the weight. And I realized I had spent too much of my life waiting for people to value what I had quietly protected. Now, with Liam's help, I had begun protecting myself. Not out of anger, out of clarity. That was a different kind of strength. The moonlight spilled across the hardwood floor. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt awake, and I knew the final piece of this story was coming soon. But this time, I'd be the one turning the page. The final signatures went through at 9:20 a.m. The house with its creaky floors and sun-soaked porch no longer belonged to me. I walked the length of the living room once more before stepping outside. The magnolia tree in the front yard was just beginning to bloom. A breeze came off the ocean, soft and familiar. I took it in like a last deep breath. Haley didn't find out until later that afternoon. Liam told me she had collapsed into a chair, face pale, scrolling through the listing announcement. The sale had gone public. Her name was still on invitations. Vendors had been booked, deposits made. She had assumed my silence meant compliance. Instead, it had been a decision. David's call came fast. He sounded tight-clipped, more shocked than angry at first. He asked how I could do something like this. He didn't wait for an answer. Then the words came harder. Said I was cruel. Said I had blindsided the family. Said I was acting out of spite. I held the phone close and let the noise settle in my ear like static. Then I told him I wasn't acting out. I was simply done waiting for permission to protect my own life. He paused then. That pause told me he had expected a protest, maybe guilt, but I had none left to give. Only Liam reached out again without an agenda. He came by that evening with groceries and soft eyes. We sat at the kitchen table of my new place, a small cabin by the lake. He made tea and told me what David hadn't said, that David had started worrying about my memory months ago, that he wasn't trying to steal but to prepare, to keep things stable, but he hadn't trusted me enough to talk about it. He had turned worry into control. That was the real betrayal. I sat with that truth for a long while. It didn't undo the damage, but it softened the sharpness of it. It made David human again. Flawed, scared, just like me. That night, I wrapped the wooden doll in a soft linen cloth and walked it down to the local charity shop. I left it with a note tucked inside the hollowed base. The diamond stayed there. I didn't need it anymore. I wanted someone to find it. Someone who might need to believe that hidden treasures still exist even in what the world calls small things. I moved into the lakeside retirement community the following week. The mornings were cool and gentle. My studio space was a small sunroom with wide windows and enough shelves for chisels and paint jars. I opened a carving class every Tuesday. Slowly, neighbors joined, then visitors, then people I hadn't expected. David came first. He brought a piece of driftwood and said he didn't know what to make, only that he wanted to learn. He didn't apologize right away. We didn't need that. He just sat beside me and listened. I handed him a carving knife, told him to start by smoothing the edges. That's where most healing begins. Haley followed a week later. She wore jeans, no makeup, and brought coffee. She stood in the doorway for a long time before she stepped inside. She asked if I would show her how to make a doll, one with open hands. I nodded and handed her a block of pine. We didn't talk about the wedding, or the gift, or the house. We talked about shapes and texture, about the feel of wood grain under your thumb, about how sometimes it takes a little pressure to reveal something beautiful underneath. By the end of the month, the studio was filled with movement and memory. Laughter mixed with quiet focus. 3 generations sat together at one long table. Liam with his steady hands, Haley carving careful curves, David still working on his first bird. There were no more accusations, no more silence, only sawdust sunlight and something that felt like peace. I kept one shelf open for finished pieces. On it sat a new doll, taller with carved hands outstretched. Inside I placed no diamond, just a slip of paper that read, "Start again." And we did. Not perfectly, not suddenly, but honestly. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of what was and build something new with the ones who are still willing to try. Even when trust is broken and love seems buried, there's always a bit of wood left to carve. There's always a shape waiting to be found.